Okay, thanks, Paul. Uh, I'm going to talk about global grants, which are somewhat similar in a lot of ways to district grants, but also very different in other ways. So there's a process, number of steps that you need to go through to be approved and get funded for a global grant. And I'm going to go through each of the steps along the way. Selecting a project, really, really critical, really important. There's a variety of ways to get introduced to a project, learn about a project, get involved in a project, and decide to do a global grant. The best way is in discussions with other Rotarians. Also, if you've got a relationship with another country, a project that one of your members in an area they're familiar with, that's also very helpful because your relationship with the location where the project is being done is critical. But there's all kinds of ways that global grants are initiated and ideas are made. One of the sites up here that Jim talked about was matchinggrants.org. If you go there, there's dozens and dozens of global grants. Go to the site, go to the left side, which is global grants, and click on it. It'll list all the global grants that are in process. That could be in the planning stage, that could be in the application stage, the implementation stage, or the completion stage. So there's all kinds of projects all over the world and all kinds of different projects. So again, your relationships with other Rotarians is the best way to come up with an idea for a global grant. Not sure why that's my fault. Okay, so after you've selected a project, this is the source I was talking about, global grants, and on the left there are projects all over the world, sponsored by all different countries. And you can go there and learn about the grants. You can be inspired to do your own grants. You can participate in one of these grants if you'd like to contribute to it. In order to qualify, the process is very similar to district grants. You've got to have a current club memorandum of understanding that's signed by the president and the president-elect. This is one of the documents that we'd like for you to upload to matchinggrants.org as part of your documentation. You got to attend a global grant seminar like tonight, and that requires, if you're going to do a global grant, that requires that your president-elect, as well as one other member of your club, attend the certification. You need to be a consistent contributor to the Rotary Foundation Annual Programs Fund share. This will be taken into account when getting approval for any monies from the district, DDF, and certainly is a big factor in making those kind of decisions. Got to be current with finances and reporting. You don't want to be delinquent on a previous grant, particularly a previous global grant, because you'll never get going with the Rotary Foundation if you're delinquent. Current 990 for tax purposes. You've also, one of the things that's not really a qualification, but it's very, very important, and that is you've got to have people who are willing to commit to your project on an ongoing level. People from your club, people from your host club, to be able to make a project be successful. Again, also, you're expected to enter 25 of 25 goals in Rotary Club Central, and this is a decision by the district management for the upcoming year. If you want to look at some of this information or learn more about global grants, you can go to the district website, under Foundation, click on Global Grants, and this will come up. It's a variety of information, including this presentation will be on there soon after this meeting. But there's lots of other information, shortcuts, the roadmap, which you're looking at right here. You can get the MOU form here. You can get any of the things you need to get qualified and get eligible for a global grant. Very helpful resource. The MOU Jim talked about, it's a memorandum of understanding. It's between your club leadership and what is expected of you by the district. Club qualifications, officer responsibilities, financial management, your bank account requirements, use of grant funds, document retention, and how to resolve and report on misuse of funds. All of that is covered in the MOU, and that has to be signed by the president-elect and the president and the current president. Okay, an international project is required for a global grant. Global grants used to be called matching grants. Now they're called global grants for the last 3 or 4 years. And it's an international partnership because there will be a host club in the country where the project is occurring. And then there will be an international sponsor, which is typically a club from our district. Most important, your project, your plan has to have a sustainable impact. Rotary Foundation, Rotary International, very focused on sustainability, rightfully so. So many projects get done and then they die over time. They don't continue. So you've got to have a plan to make sure that your project will be alive for years to come and address the needs that you identified for years to come. Has to fit into one of the Rotary's areas of focus. This used to be 6 areas of focus. There's now 7. Show those in a minute. A global grant has to mean a minimum of $30,000. It can be much more, but it has to be a minimum of $30,000. I'll show you more about how to fund that in a minute, but you can't do a $10,000 global grant. There's no such thing. The need has to be identified by the community itself. There's a form or process for doing that. In other words, we don't want you to go in and do what you think is important for an area. It's what those people and the people, your beneficiaries, believe and need to be successful. And then ultimately, the project has to strengthen the community's capacity to meet its needs. This is other components of a successful global grant. It has to begin in the community. We encourage local ownership. Many parts of global grants are training. Rotary encourages that the money you spend is spent locally whenever possible, that local people get involved and provide funding and resources. And then ultimately, you've got to measure your success against your initial goals. Areas of focus. Most people are familiar with all these. The change is that Rotary has added a 7th, supporting the environment. Again, it's really hard to come up with a humanitarian project that doesn't fit into one of these categories. So this is relatively easy, but you need to be specific about what you're trying to address. The other thing that's important here is you'll notice, with the exception of the newest area of focus, there's an and in every one of them. There's 2 components to every one. And the expectation is that you will address in one way or another both components. When we do water projects, it's required that there be a sanitation component. That doesn't mean necessarily that we have to build latrines, but it does mean we have to do a lot of training of people that are receiving the water filters on how to keep things clean and what the sources of disease, those types of things. And that's true on all the other global grants. You need to address both aspects of it. Okay, got to come up with a plan. Critical, you have relationships with partners in the area. That can be the health department, that can be the Rotary Club, that can be leadership of a particular city or village. But if you don't have these relationships, you're really probably not going to be successful in what you're trying to do. The initial step is to do a community assessment. This is something that's required by the Rotary Foundation that has to be filled out, has to be done in the area you're trying to help. And then that has to be turned in to Rotary Foundation, and they have to bless off on it. And it's pretty straightforward. What are you doing? What are you trying to do? Why are you doing it? Who are you trying to help? And how is it going to be sustainable? You got to define your budget and your funding. Budget is what you're going to spend, at least in terms of large categories of spending. And the funding means where's the money coming from? And the application actually, these numbers have to be exactly correct or it won't make sense. And then again, long-term commitment. Global grants usually take 2, 3, 4 years to plan, to execute and complete, and then do follow-up. So it is a long-term commitment. This isn't like a district grant, which takes a year or less to do. This one takes years. Let's talk about funding. There's a lot of ways to fund a grant. Rotarian and club cash contributions is one of the most common. This can come from individuals or it can come from the club or both. Used to be up until this year, the Rotary Foundation would match club and individual contributions at 50%. TRF is having funding problems and limited resources, so they've stopped doing this match as of this year. The same is true for non-Rotarian cash contributions, which can be made, but neither will be matched by the Rotary Foundation. DDF are district designated funds, which is what the district will approve for your grant, your global grant. That money will be matched 80% from the Rotary Foundation World Fund. So that's a huge way to get funded because you're almost doubling the amount of money that you have in DDF. Here's an example of a minimum way to meet the $30,000 minimum requirement. If your club or individuals give $10,000, that is not matched, but that $10,000 goes toward the $30,000 total. If you can get approved for $11,200 in DDF, 80% of that would be added or matched by the Rotary Foundation, bringing it to a total of $20,000 plus. The two of those amounts would total $30,000 or more, and that would be enough to meet the minimum requirement for a global grant. You can do different combinations of this. You can do all of it without any DDF, like $30,000 club investment, or you could do $15,000 or say $18,000 in DDF that would be matched by TRF to get you to the $30,000. That's not the best way because the district management, grant management expects that the club investment will be equal to the amount of DDF that you request, because the club or clubs, this can be multiple clubs, need to show a commitment to the project financially. Okay, financial management, similar to district grants, you need a dedicated bank account. This is critical and it's very important for getting your final report done, because if you send in a bank account that's mixed with other activities, it's going to be confusing. You'll have to explain everything in there. I've made this mistake in the past and will never do it again. If you have a dedicated account, it makes it real simple, because all you got to do is list your expenditures and the bank account statements will back that up. You've got to have a system or process for distributing funds. That typically means at least 2 people required to authorize distributing funds. Checks, bank cards, track your funds, keep a ledger of your expenditures, and make sure you follow any local laws that are required where you're spending your money. Okay, if you've got a grant defined, you think you're on your way to getting your funding, and you're ready to bring it to the district, the first thing you do is enter your information on matchinggrants.org. Similar to a district grant, there's 2 sides to matching grants, district and global grants. Enter your information, the description, your budget, and even if you're not approved for DDF, you put in the amount of DDF you're going to ask for, because you've got to define what your funding is going to be. If you don't get that DDF approved, you'll have to adjust your funding. But initially, you want to go in with a plan for your funding. Our first meeting, as Jim said, is September 1st or a few days thereafter. That's when you can make your initial presentation. And you can designate your DDF. One of the things the district does in this first meeting is that if your club wants to designate their DDF to this project or to another global grant, they can do that, as long as they do it before the September 1st or the September meeting by the district grants committee. So if you want to get $10,000 DDF and you know 4 clubs that have $2,500 available, if the 4 of you will send a letter or email to Paul and indicate that, then you're almost automatically approved for that $10,000. So it's just a good way in this first meeting for a club to designate how they want to use their amount of DDF. And then we will meet subsequently in November and in January. We put a disclaimer on there because we don't know how fast the DDF funds will be used up. If we got a lot of applications earlier, it's possible that there may not be much or any left by the second and third meetings, although there typically is. Again, the committee will look at the contributions by your club to the Rotary Foundation and make sure that you're in good standing as far as finances and reporting. This is where you enter the information on matchinggrants.org. Again, it's pretty simple, but you do need to do a good description of the project. And this rest of this you can fill in. It's not hard, but it will ask you for the budget. And you need to list on the funding page how you're going to meet that budget requirement. Okay, so resources for a proposal, matchinggrants.org is invaluable and it's required by the district grant management team. There's a tool on at RI on Rotary.org called the Global Grant Calculator. Makes it much easier when you're doing your planning for your spending for your grant. If you just fill it all out on that grant calculator, it will do all the calculations for you. And that's also a great tool to bring to your proposal when you propose your global grant to the grants committee. And then there's also a global grant application template, which you can use for getting ready for your application to RI. That's your next step. Once the district has approved the grant, has approved DDF, made sure your funding is correct, then you can start on your application to the Rotary Foundation. Again, it's menu driven. It's not hard. There's multiple pages and sections. But if you're on top of your grant and understand what you want to do, you won't find it hard to do. But you've got to make sure your funding and your spending all make sense. And again, we recommend that during this time when you're working on your project, that you get in touch with your grant staff person at RI, at TRF, because they'll help you through the application. And if they help you get through it, you got a very, very good chance it's going to be approved. Next step, once you're approved by TRF, and again, they're pretty tough. That's why you want to make sure before you submit it that you've really done a good job on the application. Next step, when you're approved, then the funding, you need to send in any of your monies, and the Rotary Foundation will then take the total money and send it to your dedicated bank account, and you can start implementing your project. Again, just like any other project, this requires good project management. That's financial control. We've talked about dedicated bank accounts. Typically, 2 people need to authorize release. That's all from the club president and 1 other person. You want to do regular checkpoints. Again, like any other project, you want to make sure things are on schedule and adjust if necessary. Partners, critical. Got to stay in contact with them because you're not there and you may not be there very often. So you're really dependent on your partners on the ground. Records retention, you want to make sure you got your records kept Rotary requires that you keep retention of any records for a global grant for 5 years. And ultimately, you want to verify your results. Typically, that's best done on the ground in the area where your grant has been spent, at least by the host club and preferably by the international club as well. And ultimately, you want to make sure you met your objectives and your beneficiaries' needs have been met. Okay, once your project is done, you've got to, and you've gathered all the information, you've got to do a final report. That's a variety of things. Again, it's menu driven. It'll ask you all the questions. What did you learn? What were your successes? Did you meet your initial objective? Is the very first question. And how would you change the process, either on your grant or future grants, based on what you've learned? The final report has to go to the Rotary Foundation. There's a variety of approvals that are necessary, such as Paul, District Governor, your sponsor, your host club, same information, the foundation chair in that district, as well as the club president for the club that you're working with, the host club. And again, you want to retain documents. A good place to do that is on matchinggrants.org or another secure filing system. Okay, global grants, they fit under the auspices of grants. Jim and I are part of the grants team, and we report to Paul Lucas, who reports to DG Kayla, and that's where we fit into the process. And like I said, there's a district grants committee of us and a few other people that, including on this chart, Conrad E., Jim Quick, and Paul, that review applications for global grants. Okay, quick reference, got to be $30,000. Multiple ways to find out about an opportunity to participate or to lead a global grant as an international sponsor or working with the host club. Lead means getting qualified, MOUs, grant training, good standing, current 990, support of TRF, good project management process, and a substantial long-term commitment and relationship. And again, we've talked about entering goals in Rotary Club Central. So the last thing we want to talk about is, if you're interested in doing a global grant, you got a good idea, good location, good relationship with somewhere in the world, get in touch with me or with other members of the grant team. We've been doing this a while. We've made our mistakes and would love to help you get this done without making the same mistakes. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of things you need to take into consideration, and we'd be glad to work with you on that. I'm done.
Great job, Scott. And on the pictures that you just had up at the very last there, it kind of reminds me of some of the global trips that we took about 17 years ago together down in Honduras and various places. Scott's been at this job for a long time and does a wonderful job, and a great leader and good support for folks that are wanting to get into this business. But it shouldn't be taken lightly. These are major projects. They take a lot of time. They take a tremendous amount of personal time and a lot of personal resources when you go on these trips to manage them. But he is certainly doing a wonderful job with that, and I think explains it very well. So we're doing pretty well on time. We might have time for one or two questions. I think Sharon Miles may have been watching the chat box there a little bit, so she may have a comment. She's one of our advisors in the Rotary Foundation Committee. So if Sharon has anything she'd like to bring up, she's welcome to unmute and come online. I guess one thing I wanted to make sure it was maybe clarified is that the deadline for getting your grant applications in this year is September 1st. A couple of years ago, it was August 1st. And so it has been extended to September 1st. And that is, you can put in your application to the grant committee. In the first pass through, we have the system where we are doing it as a calculation based on what you gave 3 years ago, what your club gave 3 years ago, in terms of what you're qualified for in terms of matching funds. The later times that we have in the November 1st and the January 1st extensions are if we have money left over after the first pass, then those funds would have a different set of criteria that were defined in one of the presentations earlier. So, which is very similar to the criteria that we used last year as well. But Sharon, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I thought you might have a question.
It's okay. There were some people asking the question if you're going to be offering this training again if their second person from the club couldn't make this meeting. So I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, it is. We are still working on how we're going to do that. We hope to have recordings that we will either, whether we use tonight's recordings or whether we create new recordings, we do plan to have recordings that are available through our district website. So if you sign on to district grants, we hope to have a link in there that would enable you to see the training. So then the question is, and the committee is still working on the details on how do we certify or confirm that that someone did come in that route. So we need some way of tracking that. And
that was another question for tonight's meeting. People that called in on the phone, I want to know if they were going to get credit for attending. My understanding, correct me, Carlo, if I'm wrong, that if they registered, you have them in the master list of everyone that registered. And is that how you're tracking attendance for tonight for whoever registered?
That's correct, Sharon. We have the master list if you've registered, but we also have the master list of how long they were on the call. So if someone jumps on for 2 minutes, then we're assuming they probably were not on enough to be certified. So we'll be sure and share that list with you, Sharon, so you can give everyone credit.
Okay. The other question I want, not a question, but a comment had to do with scholarships. You need to remember on whether it's a high school scholar or whether it's a college scholar, Rotary International Foundation funds cannot be used for Rotarians' children, brother, sister, grandfather. You can't give scholarships to Rotarians. You can use your own district money for that, but you can't use Rotary Foundation money for that. That's I get asked that every year. So just so you know, I think that was most of the questions that I thought we need to answer about attendance. And then, yeah, I think that was most. Well, let's see. They wanted to know, I saw somebody, they want to know, Paul, how will they find out when they will, how much money they get? How is it going to be disseminated?
Well, last year, what I did is I sent a note to every president and foundation chair within each club and explained to them what they how much they qualified for. And I would plan to do the same thing and probably send that out maybe around the 1st of June, I guess. That's kind of my target for that.
Okay, there was a question if you're going to cover global scholars or global grant scholarships at the meeting on Thursday night.
Global grant scholarships will be covered tonight in about 10 minutes. Okay. Or as soon as we finish talking, Conrad Heed will be covering that subject.